You're listening to the Vent Podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories from around the world of wine and spirits. From winemakers and critics to sommeliers and master distillers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping the future of today's food and drinks culture. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vent Podcast. My name is Brady, joined back in studio by Billy Galenko. How you doing, Billy?
Glad to have you back. You had to take the whole week off mourning the Orioles, huh?
I know, it's tough. If anyone watches on video, I have my Orioles Adley Rutschman picture back behind me in the frame, and it's been a tough week. I have my little Orioles baseball helmet hanging there to get it ready for next season. It'll be waiting. So
it's all right. You guys give hope to everybody like me who root for bad baseball teams, but someday their team might be good even for a little while.
We'll be good for the next couple of years.
Switching over to what we're talking about, we have a pretty cool interview coming up today with Michael Minnillo. I hope I'm saying that right. From the French Laundry that Brady set up, which I'm really excited to dive into and share more about for him. But you want to talk a little bit about, I guess, what you were doing last week, and then you're actually not going to be able to join. We're recording this ahead of time, so this is before we've chatted with Michael, and we're just excited about it. You want to talk about what you're going to be doing this week and where you'll be and what you've been up to?
We'll be at a conference this week in Napa Valley for our investment side of the business. Was a little bit of an impromptu travel, so it won't be on Michael's interview, but really excited for that. He's started as an apprentice at the French Laundry in 1998 and is now the general manager. So he has a lot of French Laundry history and per se history under his belt, which for folks who are into the American culinary scene and global, really, those are restaurants that are known around the world and really put French cooking in the U.S. on the map. It's awesome. And their wine program has come a long way as well. So that'll be a cool conversation for you guys to have. Look forward to listening to it. Last week, we were in Vegas for a similar conference for the investment side of our business. And the wine thing that we got to do was attend the Frank Family Vineyards 30th anniversary celebration that was had in Vegas, one of the hotels on the Strip or one of the resorts on the Strip.
Why was it in Vegas? I didn't even think about that.
Why was it in Vegas? I believe they've done a couple of these kind of like 30th anniversary dinners. Like I think they also had a celebration back in California as well, but they were invited out here.
The high concentration of like wine people, because like Vegas has one of the highest concentration, I think, of master somms working or just of high quality wine in the U.S. One of the highest concentrations.
It was across the spectrum. It was a lot of friends and family, mainly friends. It was a central location as well. Actually didn't get all of the details. One of our colleague is family friends with the Frank family and got to tag along. But that was really cool to meet Rich Frank and the rest of their family and to hear about each of the wines they had with dinner. It was great food. And we had their two Zinfandels and 2 cabs from them. And then their special 30th anniversary Brut Rosé, which I believe they did 55 cases or something of. Really good. It was solid. So that was enjoyable. The rest of the wine experiences while dining in LA were lackluster, but prices were a little expensive. We were heads down on business, so we weren't splurging a whole lot.
By LA, you meant Las Vegas, LV.
Las Vegas.
What was in that Brut Rosé?
I actually don't remember the variety. If I recall, it was 5 or 7 years on the lease, I believe. It was one of the better sparkling rosés that I've had here at Stateside. I've had Argyles and Schramsberg and like some of the big names like that, and those are really solid. But this was a cool surprise because I didn't know that they made such high quality wines out of that part of their portfolio. But they're really good. All the wines really were top notch.
Interesting. I tend to find U.S. based New World, well, particularly U.S. based, sparkling wines, especially rosés, to be a little more fruit forward and a little less lean. So that's always cool when you can find one that has more yeasty and other
Yeah,
characters notes to it.
definitely was. Like it had really great fruit, but it did have that yeasty characteristic, and it was, I definitely call it full bodied for sure. I'm trying to think now, it might have been Pinot Noir, because we did have a Pinot Noir too. I think I said we had the Zin in the cab, but we did have a Pinot. So
It wasn't their own fruit.
that was actually across their wines. That was something I didn't like pick up on. We didn't have like detailed notes at the tables. It was really just Rich coming up and sharing. And so if you were focused on what was in front of you, some of that was missed. It was a long day. I was up for 23 hours, I believe, that that night before. So it was a long 2 days.
Nice. Well, my only sparkling experience this weekend, I had a sparkling Mondeuse, which is typically a grape grown in the Savoie region of France, which is, if you know where Jura is, it's right next door. It's connected. It's mountainous. So that was crisp and lean and fun and simple. Wasn't as, it's probably the opposite of your wine, but it was cool. It's a rare grape. And then, well, that was exciting. It's exciting that you had that. I was just thinking about some of the other sparkling wines or producers that we were going to have on, and I would never have thought about a Napa Valley producer randomly having that at their 30th anniversary. So that's cool.
We should have Schramsberg on. I like them. And it's hard to tell this. You can't really tell the story of sparkling without, in the US at least, without them.
They were when I first started doing my studies, they were the ones everybody's, if you want a benchmark of US sparkling, check out Schramsberg. On another random note, I guess I'll walk everybody through my logic here, but Mondeuse made me think of my wine book, the grapes book, which also made me think of the Oxford Companion to Wine. And like a little tease, we have one of the editors, the new edition of the Oxford Companion to Wine is out. And we have one of the editors, Julia Harding, MW, coming on. Jancis Robinson was busy. But as a fun little aside, I was telling Brady this actually offline. They offered to send a book plate to me ahead of time that was signed by all the editors. I was like, oh, that's really cool. For some reason, I thought book plate meant a whole book free. So I was like, oh, thanks. I'm really excited. I remember buying my first edition after going to the New York Public Library many times just to read the book originally. And it turns out a book plate is not a book. And it's also not the inside cover of a book, which is what I thought a book plate might be. So I got like a 2x2 like kind of postage stamp today in the mail, signed by all of the editors with just their names and a nice little card that said, thank you and enjoy reading. But that was quite the random development. But now I have a postage stamp signed by Jancis Robinson and a couple NWs.
Get to buy the actual copy now, put together a little shadow box, frame it all up with a green mat in the back.
I really spiced it up a bit. No, I guess I really am. But I'm looking forward to getting the second, I don't know if it's the second edition, but the latest edition. The first one was so great that we'll be replacing this. So get ready for our interview with Julia coming up in a few weeks, I guess. It's probably closer to a month. But cool. Other updates from my side. For those who don't follow me on LinkedIn, unlike Brady, I don't have a giant LinkedIn following, but I posted a while back that I did pass the certified Scotch professional exam by the Council of Whiskey Masters. So I'm continuing my Scotch education, which is very exciting. And as part of that, I went to a whiskey dinner this last week with a Glen Scotia whiskey dinner. The master distiller was there. We got to taste 4 different expressions as well as an intro cocktail. So that was really neat. I don't think I've expressed my love on here, but I'm a big fan of Campbelltown. Is like one of my favorite regions in all of Scotland. After I went to Edinburgh, the first time I had tasted while I was there, and one Campbelltown whiskey stood out to me. And then I kept telling everybody I didn't know it was like a cool small region to like. But ever since I've been into it. So for those who don't know, Campbelltown is a whiskey producing region at the very bottom of a peninsula in Scotland. And right now it only has 3 active distilleries. There's some that are in the works to get started again, but it was like the hub of whiskey making in the late 1800s. Like it was like called the whiskey capital of the world. And then it went downhill and over time either fell out of style. There's a bunch of different reasons. You can check out an article. I have an article. If anybody wants it, I'll share a link to it that I wrote. But basically there's 3 left and they've been producing stuff in really cool ways. So this was neat. I don't think they did it on purpose, but each whiskey we had, except for the very last one, was finished in different sherry casks. So one was a PX, One was finished in an Oloroso cask and one was finished in an Amontillado cask. That was really cool. It's like an experience both between the whiskey and also the influence, the Campbelltown style, I guess the Glen Scotia style. And then
How was the
being able to
Amontillado?
have,
I don't know. I've definitely had PX and Oloroso, but I don't think I've had one finished in Amontillado.
it was cool. That one, I was looking forward to that case, that not case, cask influenced the most, but that was one of their lightly peated expressions. So I got more peat than anything, but it was definitely like a little brighter and a little bit more like herbaceous overall. And I don't think that was just the peat. I'm also like going through and revisiting all my fortified wines here as well. So I was just drinking an Amontillado, like actual sherry before going and tasting the difference between Oloroso. And I think you're able to get some of the Spino characters or the stuff that comes from its time where it's under floor before it comes over and becomes oxidized and becomes an Amontillado. So I think I definitely think you could do it. It's a lighter expression. It's a little bit more lean rather than rounded that you get from like the Oloroso, and definitely more than like the PX.
Interesting. I imagine that I haven't done a ton of exploration in like with different finishing casks and stuff in the Scotch space as much as I have in American whiskey or bourbon, but I imagine it takes a little bit of time and discernment to differentiate between some of that. So when you have a heavy peat influence, I think that gets pretty tough.
Well, if they're all peated expressions, then it's easier because you're still apples to apples,
Sure,
and you're like the variation can be this. But if the other ones aren't peated, then you're like, trying to dive in to get that whiskey or the cask influence. That was interesting. And then it ended up with a 25-year Glen Scotia, which was cool. Definitely the highlight of the show there. And that was just basically straight. So that was not straight, aged traditionally. And I think it was a sherry cask, but it was basically a long time and not finished anything. So it was good. Yep.
Nice.
Great. Well, shall we, quickly for what we were drinking this weekend, I'm going to keep this going until I want to, until we can't do it anymore. So what we're drinking this weekend is going to be another one that's just personally on my mind and my passion for this time of year. And I don't know why fall makes me think of this, but we're going to do Mosel Riesling this week, but it's going to be the Spätlese. Actually, it doesn't have to be Mosel. It'll be German Riesling Spätlese. So it's that Spätlese literally means later harvest. Spät means late. So it's like you have your Cabinet, your Spätlese, and your Auslese. So it's like the middle of the picks for Riesling. They tend to have a little bit of residual sugar, but are balanced always by amazing acid. So the ABV is typically like 9%, 10%. So you can have a couple glasses and it's totally fine. And they're just like, when you get the ones with some botrytis and a little bit of age on it, well, by age, I mean, I prefer like closer to 10 years if possible as like a starting point. 5, you'll start to see it. They get this like ginger, saffron, all of those fun kind of botrytis flavors on top of some apricot. And for me, it just tastes like fall flavors. And it works so well with any of the different like turkeys or any of the fall foods you're going to have, even like sweet things. It can balance all of that out. And the acid always cleans up everything. Everybody start having some Spätlese Rieslings. If you don't know which one to get, I would ask somebody, but they're pretty good. The best ones are great.
A good move with honey baked ham, maybe.
Because both the acid and the sugar would offset some of the fatty, if you do have a fatty one, and also the salt and the sweetness that's on the honey, depending on what bite of the ham you get.
That's true.
It works with all of it.
The chunky, sugary brown part at the top.
It would still work. So yeah, it's cool. So I had to get that out there. Do you want to get to our introing our interview? I would say Brady won't be joining the interview, but he is the inspiration behind it and did all the work to get the French Laundry on the line. So we are happy to have them.
Michael's a exciting guest for me because I've been wanting to have someone from one of really the flagship, like I said, benchmark fine dining establishments in the US. And Michael's been at the French Laundry since 1998. Like I said, he started as an apprentice. He became captain and had so much success there in the front of the house that when Keller opened per se in New York, he went over to train the front of house staff and was there for 8 years, I believe, till he came back to the French Laundry, where he's now the general manager. And so obviously has worked very closely with Chef Keller and the teams at both locations for some time. And I know they have I just heard and read that the two restaurants have a fairly symbiotic relationship. So I think there's probably a wealth of information that Michael has about not only service and fine dining and sort of what those two restaurants have meant in their respective areas to New York and the Bay Area or Napa, but also to just the evolution of the wine programs and the beverage programs overall. I know when we had Bobby Stuckey on, he talked about the French Laundry's wine list in the early 2000s, which was when I believe he was there around 2000, 2001, and sort of how it went from being very California-centric list to much more globalized. So interested to hear you guys talk about that, and I think it'll be really interesting for our listeners. So, yep, today's guest. And Billy, if you want to add anything else, we can go there. Otherwise, are you good?
No, I was just going to say I'm excited because we've had Andre Houston Mack and we've had Bobby Stuckey and we've had people who've worked there and talked about the influence of the restaurant on them. So it's going to be cool to see somebody who's was there for so long or has been there in the early days and is now back and is basically like helped cultivate this environment that they all raved about. So I'm really excited for that.
So many quality folks come out of this ecosystem. So interested to hear from someone who's been there for so long and obviously has had almost every role you can have, it sounds like, in the front of house between the two locations. Enjoy Billy's conversation with Michael Minnillo of the French Laundry and Thomas Keller's restaurant group.
All right, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
You got it. Thanks for having me.
Now, this is something I think our audience has heard us talk about the French Laundry in numerous times, and also per se has come up through both past guests and also just through friends of the program who live in New York. So we're really excited to have you on to be able to pull back the curtain a little bit on both of those. But before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit more about who you are and how you got into the mix in both of these restaurants?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I started at the French Laundry back in 1998. I got a job in the kitchen. So I went to college at University of Cincinnati and I was headed to law school. And I took a break between undergrad and going that route and started cooking at one of my father's restaurants, the Baricelli Inn. And the next thing I knew, I had a kind of like an internship set up at the French Laundry. And I packed all my things and moved out here from Cleveland, Ohio, and started in the kitchen. And then a few months later, was offered a full-time position. And I was a chef for about 3.5, 4 years. And then I moved to the dining room, a couple different positions here. And then towards the end of 2003, I moved to New York City and opened Per Se. And I was there till 2012. And then I came back to the French Laundry to be the general manager in 2012. So over 25 years now here, my whole adult life.
Wow, that's incredible. Can you, I'm sure the move from Cleveland to Napa was difficult for the weather and stuff. You probably missed Cleveland a lot.
Horrible. It was terrible. I remember pulling up and I didn't know places like this existed in the US. So it reminded me of Burgundy for sure. I had been a few times and even Bordeaux to a certain extent, but it was definitely a far cry from Cleveland.
Can you, I guess for our listeners, like I think we've mentioned the French Laundry and in the past and Per Se, but can you talk a little bit about what it is and what makes it special, and then also what it was like back then, and then we'll talk about how it's evolved over time.
I've gotten to see quite a bit of change and evolution through my time. Good resources, the cookbook too. So the French Laundry cookbook came out in 1998, and you look back at some of those dishes now and how refined they are that we serve today. It's a good reference point. And then obviously the newer cookbook too. But it was so different, but yet very similar to how things are today for sure. The most important thing is taking care of the guests and making people happy, and that's pretty much unchanged. And how we get there has definitely changed through the years for sure.
So what was it? So today, just setting the scene, it's one of the premier restaurants in the United States as a whole, and if not the world. Back then, was it a hot spot among people coming up from the Bay and the area, or was it still one of those kind of destination type restaurants?
So the French Laundry opened in 1978. Don and Sally Schmidt were the original proprietors, and it was booked since then. It was really hard to get a reservation since the moment it opened. They ran it from 78 to 92, and then Thomas took it over and reopened in 94. And it continued that difficulty to get into. Obviously, Chef Keller refined it to a whole new level and almost refined fine dining throughout our country, the U.S. Back then, it was Thomas, Chef Keller, Charlie Trotter, New York City, blazing the trail for where we are today. And then there was a couple huge things along our journey was the Esquire magazine. We were named, John Mariani, he dined here the second night we opened and named the French Laundry top new restaurant. And then the James Beard Awards, of course. And then in 1997, we had a pretty monumental article in the New York Times from Ruth Reichel, who wrote a feature on the French Laundry and called it the most exciting place to eat in the United States. And that was kind of like, it was already maximum, but then it was like, that's when the waiting list just tripled and quadrupled. And we saw a lot more international guests. We brought a lot more attention to Napa Valley from all places. The New York Times, this is all pre-internet, pre-social media, pre any of that. So the newspapers were the means to get the word out. And I even remember myself reading that article in the Cleveland Public Library on the old microfiche. There was nothing. There was no book. There was very few articles, and it's just hard to get. It's hard to get accessibility to that stuff. So that article was kind of a monumental article for sure. But then all the awards happened, the world's 50 best. We came in number one there and all various, then eventually Michelin came to the US. You got the Michelin Awards, the San Francisco Chronicle, Forbes 5-star, so on and so on.
Wow. I guess it became like an avalanche after they started coming. When you first started, what would you say? So I guess the guest has always been the core focus of the restaurant, regardless of the cuisine or the wine program. But outside of that, what would you say, like when you started, what was the focus in terms of both wine and food? And then over your time before you left per se, how would that change? And then we can advance.
Generally, when I started, the focus was the food. The entire property was set up for what was on the plate. There was French Laundry had no artwork back then. We played no music. It was very much food, menu, cuisine driven, and we still have, but one of the most incredible chefs, American for sure, in Thomas, and it's definitely led by the cuisine. And then through time, we didn't have a sommelier for a while. Even when I started, there was no sommelier. Laura Cunningham, who was our general manager, our original general manager, and still with us today, was running the wine program, and that there were a lot of things happening that at that moment in time, we needed to get somebody who could be in charge of that branch of the restaurant as we continue to grow and evolve for the future. We had, so many projects working on. Per se was one, obviously our own wine, Modicum. We started that in 2000. That was a big project. We needed somebody to help Laura with that. So those are two main wine focused things we needed to have. Per se, planning started, I remember 99, maybe when I first got here. We're already working on that project, and it opened in 2004.
So it was that when you were working on it, that was more wine was integrated from the ground up, and that was, you were basically developing the ambiance, or what were you developing the approach? So what took 5 years to kind of develop?
Back then, we were like looking at plans for the kitchen, designing. I personally hadn't gone into the dining room yet, but just opening that restaurant, knowing that knowing what I know now is we had to develop that whole wine program almost just a few years after, but the French Laundry wine program really wasn't developed fully until Bobby Stuckey came here. Our first sommelier was a gentleman named Dan Dawson. He was here for about a year and a half. And then really wasn't until Bobby that the wine program at the French Laundry took off. And he was really a dedicated professional who could do that. Pull the focus from Laura. She doesn't have to worry about that so much.
I was going to say, so when we spoke with Bobby, he was talking about, and I'd love to get your perspective on taking a step back away from the wine and looking at the broader picture. What struck you the most that was unique kind of when you met Chef Keller, and kind of what are some of the core tenets that you guys instilled both in the French Laundry and then were essential to carry over to per se that DNA?
Well, I think the biggest thing at the French Laundry is the unpretentious nature of how we treat people, and obviously Laura was a big part of that. And then Thomas with the food is the same. Our food is extremely relatable. There's no mystery. It's pretty easy for all of us to see what's on the plate. We can all go to restaurants all over the place and they serve you something from, I don't know, some remote island off the coast of Japan, and it's the specific type of cuisine or whatever. And I have no idea if it's executed correctly or not, because I have no idea what that cuisine tastes. But we all know what a good piece of meat tastes like, or lobster or shrimp. So the food has always been very approachable, relatable, yet very technical. And one of the big things about Thomas is he's the most intelligent chef I've ever worked with. His knowledge is unmatched from anyone. So many chefs I've come in contact with in my career, but Chef Keller definitely has a knowledge depth that is great. And being able to tap into that resource for the cuisine is great.
Is it a depth of knowledge just in, I guess you're saying it's everything. So is it it's not just technique? Is it flavors? Is it
technique?
Is it
flavor?
How did it differ?
Our menu, we change our menu every night. So the first night we opened, we had a very difficult service, and they all sat around the pass in the kitchen and said, we're going to rewrite the menu for tomorrow. And we've been doing that 30 years later. Every day we change the menu. We all sit around the pass. The chefs meet after service. They go through the menu, write it for the next day. So it's constantly changing, constantly evolving, always trying new things or perfecting dishes. And so pulling in all those resources for sure.
As a young chef, what was the most exciting part of working there when you started and evolving over time?
All the other people, the incredible people I worked with. I started when Grant started couple weeks before me. We started at the same time. Eric Zeerold, Stephen Durfee, just so many great chefs and talented individuals. And that was just in the kitchen. And then in the dining room, I got a whole new group of friends and colleagues that I met, and seeing how they've all moved forward through their career is incredible.
I think a lot of people compare it to, it's hard to compare, but there's a sports team where there's either a coach or a player, a university that produces just amazing, they go on to have their own great careers, but it's basically, there's a lot of talent that kind of comes there and then it's just honed and springboard.
Sure.
From
we use that analogy here too. It's not far off.
Is that how you guys attract new people, or people that I guess that's an interesting kind of question there. It's if there are people with so much talent, how do you convince them now's not the time to start your new thing? You should come and work with us for a while. before you move on, or is that not a hard, based on your reputation, not a hard kind of
Yeah,
problem?
no, we definitely attract great talent, and this is the French Laundry every day is almost like a new day. We have honed everything over the past 30 years, and tonight's service will be the best we ever have. The food will never be better. The service will never be better, and it's just pulling from all those past experiences, past people, past team members,
Mhm.
all giving us this knowledge. And then tomorrow night will be even better because we'll be able to draw from tonight. And if you're passionate about this profession, there's really no better way or place to be. The setting, the environment, it's pretty special. It's pretty unique. And then you're surrounded by 50 like-minded people. That's also, when I first started in restaurants, it's an afterthought. You're an actor or writer or doing something to pay the rent or get by. And it's good to see now that it's a true profession.
How have you seen that change? I guess in that same time, there's been the rise of celebrity chefs, celebrity sommeliers. Have you seen that impact either this or also even opening per se too?
Celebrity chefs, celebrity sommeliers. I see that. The thing about the French Laundry per se is it's busy. We're a busy restaurant. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. So we're like in our own little thing. We're in our own little bubble, and we are we're not really too much broadcasting what we're doing, but we're just trying to make a difference each night in the dining room and hope that makes a difference globally or outside of that. But it's not something that we are actively promoting, or it's a special thing what happens, and it's hard. So what is a celebrity chef? Thomas is a celebrity chef, but he hasn't really done anything to become a celebrity chef. It's just because he's popular. He's never done TV shows or cooking shows or Iron Man or what's the Bobby Flay, all that stuff. Chopped. But he's a celebrity chef, but how do you define that, or who defines that? But we're just like doing our own thing and hoping people take notice. And obviously people do. We have a really great following, but it's nothing, we're not trying to throw it out there.
Right. Okay. Well, I want to dive in a little bit more about how the wine program has developed over time. But before we do that, can we talk quickly about per se for a little bit? I want to basically kind of I guess what it is. How did the team develop, the one that was going to be opening the restaurant, and then a little bit about your time there since you spent 10 years.
Basically, this was a massive undertaking for us, Thomas, Laura, everyone. Chef Keller had been in New York before. He had a restaurant called Raquel. It was on Varick down in the Village. And I believe it's a YMCA now, or a Boys and Girls Club. It's not a restaurant anymore. But he was partnered there with Serge Raoul, and that's where the name comes from. R-A from Raoul, and then K-E-L from Keller, Raquel. And then that ended up, it didn't survive the recession of the late 80s. So they ended up closing that restaurant. And Thomas has always wanted to make a return to New York, and it's hard to return to New York. The time we went to New York, Alain Ducasse had just opened up at the Essex House, and it was an incredible restaurant, one of the best meals I've ever had. And New Yorkers are very protective of their city, and it's hard for someone from the outside to come in and do that. And I feel like they had a tough time welcoming Alain Ducasse. Were they going to have a tough time welcoming us? And we're different, but still, Thomas, Chef Keller was for French Laundry. He's one of the top restaurants. We won the world's 50 best in 2001, 2002. And we're just coming into this project. And then the project itself is this massive $1 billion building, Time Warner Center. So there was a lot on the line for us. So we made the decision to close the French Laundry and bring out the team from the French Laundry to indoctrinate or open per se. That was the plan. So it was about 40 of us who came out. We were here and we trained the staff. We hired the staff. We trained the staff, and then we opened. And then 5 days later, we had the fire, and then we had to close for another couple months. So we did it all over again. 2 months later, we hired more people and retrained and opened. It was a great time.
Can you share a little bit more about that fire? We briefly touched on it back with Andre, but it sounds like a crazy.
It was a Saturday. It was in between lunch and dinner. I remember noticing I had been really working on there was a wood burning fireplace in the dining room there, and I had been working on the fires since we opened. I was always the guy throwing the logs on and whatnot. And I remember going back in the kitchen. I started seeing smoke come out of there was smoke coming out of the light fixtures. Something wasn't right. And we called, and next thing the New York Fire Department was there, and they were trying to figure out what was going on. And eventually they took their pickaxes and threw them into the wall. And as soon as oxygen got in there, it was like just flames everywhere in the back of the kitchen. And the building was brand new. We had this, I don't even know how expensive, $500,000 Bonnet stove just installed. It was craned in through the window, the fourth story window, because it wouldn't fit in the doorway. and I remember the firemen connecting their hoses and turning the water on and just dousing that stove because it was so hot and the radiant heat was coming off of it, and the gas was off, but it was still like really hot. And they just doused all their water on the stove. And I was like, oh my gosh, just to put the heat out. and then they went after the fire, and was like, so the water, I don't know if it had been, but the water was like, it looked like iced tea. It was so brown. And they put the fire out. And I remember leaving that day. I thought we'd be closed for a couple days, but sure enough, we were closed for 2 months. Smoke damage. I had no idea how bad smoke damage could be. The whole restaurant smelled so bad for like weeks.
Wow. I can imagine. Was there anybody any customers, any guests at the time?
There were a few. They didn't really know what was going on. We were like getting everybody out from lunch, just finishing up lunch. So they were leaving. We hadn't opened yet for dinner. So we were in that in-between time, and then we closed. And then we reopened in May after the fire.
And then, so how was there? So there were 40 of you that came from the French Laundry. Obviously, that couldn't stay closed forever. So how did you guys decide on the contingent that was going to stay on in New York and build it to what it is today?
That's a good question. I felt that was probably the one of the most difficult years, just as far as work goes. It was a lot of work because we basically reopened per se twice, and then we had to go back and reopen French Laundry. So French Laundry had been closed for 6 months. It was like reopening the French Laundry because it was like a whole new staff there as well. And so when you close for 6 months, you lose people for sure. You like to say that you're going to keep everybody, and it's just not the reality of the situation. And so we started over again at the French Laundry. And so I left New York in May of 2004, kind of end of May, to come back to French Laundry. And we have a new pastry chef, a new chef de cuisine. Laura was still the general manager. Larry, our longtime maitre d', was here, and that was about it. The sommelier team was still in New York. Andre was there. He's head sommelier at Per Se. And Paul Roberts was like beverage director. So he was really at French Laundry doing the day-to-day stuff. So we found a sommelier here, and that was a tough summer. And then what happens, lo and behold, on a Saturday night, you look out at the French Laundry and there's Frank Bruni waiting in the courtyard to have dinner at the French Laundry. And you're like, what is going on? Like, why is he at the French Laundry? We had all been on the lookout for him
Right.
because he's going to review per se at some point, but we weren't really. I don't think none of us were really expecting him to come to the French Laundry. But sure enough, there he
Right.
was, and so he had dinner at the French Laundry, and then he had a reservation. He had reservations at per se 3 days later. We thought it'd be fun. I waited on him here at French Laundry, and then they flew me back to wait on him at per se. So I waited on him here, and then 2 days later at per se, just to have fun with him.
How did you guys know he was? How did you know he was going to go to per se that quickly after not going?
We had a bunch of, we had names, aliases, all the restaurant community shares. So we were pretty confident he was having dinner at per se that night, but we didn't. No one was expecting him at the French Laundry, and that was like such a cool time to.
Right.
Like hunting the critic. Those days may be over, to be honest. It's just not the same anymore. And with social media, TikTok, Instagram, the day of the critic is almost, and now they don't even like rate. There's no ratings. They just write a story or write an article. So it could be the last 11 Madison was going through it, French Laundry, bunch of restaurants at that time. So it was definitely exciting. And then that article came out, and that was such a monumental. We've never really been focused on those kind of things. We've always been focused on just taking care of each other and trying to impress each other. And by doing that, like if I impress my colleague, my expectations are higher than the food critic for the New York Times, all these people. I have 30 years of hospitality profession in me, culinary and dining. Like I have very high expectations. And so if somebody does something to me that impresses me, that's what we're trying to go for. We want to impress each other. And then the guest obviously will be impressed. The food critic easily will be impressed.
Right.
So that's our philosophy. And we never really say, oh, we have to do this. We have to get 4 stars. We have to get 3 stars. We have to, and all those accolades are great. And they're all very humbling and flattering, but they're all for what you did yesterday. None of them are for what you're going to do tonight or tomorrow. And that's what we're always focused on is the next day, the next service, 5 years from now, 5 minutes from now, all those kind of things.
On that similar note, have you seen the expectations of the customer or the diner or the guest change over time, especially with like social media? Is it more just like people trying to come for clout, just see that they're there and just get a picture of a fancy wine bottle, or are the expectations for the cuisine still where they were at the same time?
I think that the expectations of the guests are extremely high. At the French Laundry, it's not easy to get a reservation. So you have to already put in the effort to get in here, to get the table, to get the reservation. We get less people like that are just like trying to come for social or post something, or they really want the experience. They want to enjoy it. They arrive early. Everybody arrives early at the French Laundry, and nobody leaves. They don't want to leave. They don't want it to end. So we're always trying to extend the guest experience as best we can, and that's like always one of our running primary goals. And so it's not. I think maybe some people have that in their mind. They want to come here and post at the French Laundry, but it's an old stone building and it's hard to get Wi-Fi. So it's hard to post there. And then they're like,
surprise.
They're like consumed with the magical evening they're having, and they don't even realize, before you know it, we've already taken them away.
That's the best kind of experience anyway. You're too distracted to even want to take a picture. So
Exactly.
yeah. Cool. Well, so you spent 10 years at per se, got very well established, and it kept going. How did you make the transition into the dining room? And then what was it like coming back when you came back to the French Laundry in your time since?
I was chefing, cooking, and actually had a job set up in Paris at Lucas Carton, a 3 Michelin star restaurant there. And because I had worked all the stations in the kitchen, and then it's okay, now what? I really didn't want to be a sous chef. That wasn't really something I was interested in. So I was going to continue my culinary training, if you will. And I remember having a conversation with Chef Keller, and I told him, we were just talking about leaving, and I said, it's hard because I don't want to leave the restaurant, but I get it. I think I've run its course. And then we both started talking about the dining room, and it's something I never really thought about, and having always been a cook. And then the next thing I was like, well, maybe I'll work in the dining room for a little bit. And then I started doing that and immediately fell in love with it. And then I was really good at it. I wasn't expecting to be good. I was like nervous at first, but then it just seemed so natural, the whole aspect of it. And I was still really good at making people happy. And so I kept pursuing that side of it. And I always kept trying new roles, and I wanted to be the expediter, and I was the expediter. And then I wanted to be a captain. And then the next thing you know, I'm the general manager of the French Laundry. And if you were to tell me that 25 years ago, I would have said you were crazy for sure. For sure.
So what is, just out of curiosity, I don't think a lot of people have a full grasp on what that means. Like what is your kind of like day to day? I know the general manager does like everything, but kind of like give somebody a little sneak peek in the life of a general manager at the French Laundry.
Well, I tell you, it's like 2 jobs. You have an administrative job that you do during the day. That's 9 to 5. And then you close all that up, and then you open a restaurant, and then you're maitre d' diner manager from when we open at 4:00 till 11, 10:30, 11 till it winds down here. I grew up in a restaurant, so I was always interested in how things work. And now I'm in a position where I can make things work, and I can change things, and I can play with things and move things around, and find great people, train, teach, mentor. So I'm incredibly lucky for sure.
That sounds fantastic for somebody who like lives and breathes hospitality like you. What would you say? Are you communicating directly with guests, or is that more like when you want to, or like how does that work? Or are you kind of in the background?
I communicate. I spend the majority of my time communicating with guests, whether it's phone, email, prior to, and then when they're here, I try to get to each table. Obviously, the people I know, it's easy. The people I don't know, I like to introduce myself and meet them and talk to them and hear their story and share the evening with them. I think that one of the best things we do here is we're very generous with our time, and that's people take that for granted. And I think to be generous with your time is a very, very great luxury in a restaurant of this. But
yeah,
Thomas
I think
too. When Thomas is in town, he goes through the dining room and says hello to everyone and talks to people, and people like can't believe it. They're like shocked. They're like, they can't believe he's here, but he's like always here. Thomas is like always at the French Laundry. He's I would say 90% of his time is spent here, and we're incredibly lucky for that. But just being able to go out and talk to the people, I'm definitely front and center involved. I'm not behind the scenes. I think that's a great way to if you're in the front line, you could see it in real time.
That's something that I feel like Chef Keller and I guess yourself have cultivated over the years, because that was something Bobby mentioned. But then we also had his wine director, Carlin, on as well. And she mentioned that was an essential part of hers. So I feel like that's such an important piece of really building that experience, like you were talking about earlier. It's awesome. Well, transitioning, since we haven't really touched much on the wine part, then not that we have to really, but I'm just personally curious. So since your time there, it's transitioned. You guys didn't really have a sommelier. I believe when they did come on, it was a little bit more of a California-centric wine list. And then over the years, it's evolved. Can you describe how it's evolved and what your wine list is like today?
Well, we're always California centric. We are a 3 Michelin star restaurant in the heart of the Napa Valley, and just pulling from those great Michelin starred restaurants in France, Burgundy, even Italy. The wine list, we could take Le Côte d'Or in Burgundy. That they have a world list too, but they have the best Burgundy list, right? They have the Burgundy.
Mm-hmm.
And so the French Laundry is like that for Napa Valley. Like, we want to start with one of the most amazing collections you can have in Napa Valley. And then from that,
Right.
what else do our guests want? Bordeaux, white Burgundy, Champagne, of course, Spain, Australia, and then build it through that. And then you have a restaurant that's been open for 30 years, and with Thomas, almost 46 years in total. So you have built a collection of wine that is pretty incredible. And it's never,
that makes sense.
We've definitely had sommeliers in before I was a GM, and those days we've made those mistakes in the past. And I feel like when you get a sommelier, sometimes they like to put their own personal touch on the wine list. When we realize that and so then you're left over with all this wine, right? That no one orders, right? It's like wine that you're never gonna, just because so-and-so thought it was like the wine of the moment, whatever, 15 years ago. And now you have 3 cases of it, and you just can't sell it. So
right.
The philosophy is definitely, what do the guests want? What do the guests want to drink? What's important to the restaurant? We have a bunch of wines that are storied in us. Vietti in Italy is a very powerful winery. That's where Chef Keller first heard of the French Laundry. So we support their wine. And then obviously our partners, we have 48 investors here in the French Laundry, many of which have wineries. So we want to make sure they're well represented on our list. And then the organizational wines, Relais Chateau, Traditions and Qualité, we have their wines also. But then it's pretty much the guests. The guests are great at telling you what they want, and we're great at getting that information from them. And that's very important. And I could tell you, per se, it's different. You have different tastes there. You have, California is not what people want to drink when they go to New York City. But I'll tell you, here in Napa Valley, everybody wants to have some Napa. They want to have some of the wine. That's why they're here. So we want to make sure we have an extensive, and then the half bottle list too. We probably have the biggest selection of half bottles, I would say, maybe in the world. Because we're big part of our wine philosophy is not pouring a wine with every course. I think, or we think, I should say, because restaurants do it and they do a great job with it. But for us, when you pour wine with every course, it just becomes a lot of information, and it becomes a lot of talking, a lot of sommelier lecturing, a lot of information that you may not have really asked for or wanted. So we're really focused on half bottles, because then you could then you
I
could
love that.
present the half bottle for a few courses, 2 or 3 courses, and then have a half bottle white, half bottle red, another half bottle red to finish. And then you had 3 wines versus 16, 17 different wines, which I've had before. And then I don't, it's just hard to pull back. I remember having a meal and they poured me 24 different wines. And the only one I remember was the Spanish water they poured with one course, just because it's just so much information.
Right.
And then your palate gets totally fatigued. And so then it's not
I was
about the
going to say
guest
your
at that
palate
point.
alone.
Your palate's, you know, it
No,
becomes, we feel that it's not really about the guest at that point. It's more about the sommelier. It's like the sommelier is
Right.
going to tell you how much he knows and give you all his knowledge, whether you ask for it or you don't. Our sommeliers are more like maitre d's that have incredible wine.
Do you think that's where that motto started? I guess you guys have the motto of guest first and like food centric.
It starts with Thomas and Laura conveying to Bobby their vision, and then Bobby taking it and running with it. And when I say that to this day, like when I meet with people interviewing for sommelier or head sommelier or beverage people, the most important thing is the guests and the restaurant. It's never about the wine. It's never about the food. I'm sorry. It's never about solely in those moments. It's about the totality of the experience. So we need to have a sommelier who's focused on the meal. And that the analogy is the maitre d'. He's a maitre d' that has great wine knowledge. It brings it much more relatable, because first, in so many restaurants, and I've experienced this throughout, it is the wine team operates like the Vatican City in Rome. They're like their own country, and they have their own set of rules, and they have their own things they can do and can't do. And we don't want that. We want it to be a part of the collective whole. And then it's great for like training and mentoring. And we have so many people that get involved in the wine program that leave the wine program and come back to the dining room, and vice versa. And Bobby would definitely blaze the trail for that. And then I think just all the people that have come after him have embraced it, and embraced who was here before them, and made their own kind of marks on the programs.
I don't want to take too much more of your time here. You've already been generous. But one question is on that.
I got all day.
Think about great. Well, then on the wine side, since your menu changes every day, but you do have a large cellar, how do you guys come in with recommendations based on the day's menu, or is it really up to the customer there?
We don't have a set wine pairing. That's a big thing that we do here. Is you go to restaurants and they have the wine pairing, and this is the wine pairing, and our wine experience is more of a conversation. We like to find out what the guest is, because if you look in the kitchen, if you look at all the orders, they're all different. We have 2 menus. We have the chef's menu, we have the vegetable menu, we have the evolution menu. So there is really never a night where there's 2 tickets in the kitchen that are the same. Why would the wines be the same then? So we want to customize it. We want to personalize it. We want to make people give them things that they aren't expecting. So it's more of a conversation, and it's a conversation of how much you want to drink, what's your budget, how much do you want to spend, and then like things you like, things you don't like. As far as wine, just having that conversation, and it's can be difficult to have those conversations, I think. But at the French Laundry, it's not. It's very open. It's very honest. There's a good rapport. The guests are very excited to be here. They're so happy. They really will give whatever we ask of them. And so just in those moments, you share these conversations and you share these tidbits, and you get this excitement, and then you can go from there. And And then it's pretty easy at that point. If it's someone celebrating their 50th birthday, it's easy to find a birth year wine to slip in there. Things like that aren't they don't expect. I think those are the things that set our wine program apart from others. Yeah. It's easy to follow that sommelier pairing or the pouring. I feel like it's the same pairing, sake and Madeira and Gruner, but we want to kind of like make it more personal and whether they had a great trip to Burgundy or they had a great trip to Australia and then finding a half bottle or a full bottle of something from that region and that comes up in conversation, but they're not really expecting it, but then they get it and they're just like so happy. So I think the personalization of our wine experiences is what we excel at for sure. And then we have this massive inventory to pull from. So we have all these tools to pull from, and that's what gets it exciting. And you see the sommeliers, they always come over and they say, "Oh, I just sold a bottle of Latache on table 5," and I'm like, "Really? You sold the Latache? Like the gentleman wanted Central Coast Pinot, and you steered him into the Latache." We have more conversation, we have more fun, and we have all these great wines.
Do you guys have a large budget each year for just laying down wine?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very generous, and we have our budgets. We have a specific range we want to keep it within. You can go crazy buying wine. So we definitely have a range that we want to keep it in, and we'll present that with the sommelier and the head sommelier, who currently is Andrew Adelson, and then it's really up to him. He can, if he falls into the parameters of what we need, and all of our head sommeliers have come through, so they really know what we want and what we're looking for, and he's looking for. It's
interesting to think. Sorry to interrupt there. I was going to say, it's interesting to think of a sommelier buying wines to lay down that maybe utilize when they're not even there anymore, or way down the line. Yeah. That must be an interesting concept.
We have our allocations. We keep those, and the esoteric stuff. It's not. We're not really like too crazy on esoteric stuff. We'll pour it here and there, but there's so much wine in there. We can't move from sommeliers making poor decisions on what to buy, what they thought was going to be the next hot thing.
Right. Well, I guess one closing kind of question here. What do you think? What is like one thing you would like people, either a common misconception about the French Laundry, or one thing you like think people should know that maybe they don't already when they're thinking about the French Laundry?
I would think that. I think the common misconception is value. I think the French Laundry is one of the great values. It's always been a great value, and as far as to the fine dining world around us, the menu is expensive for sure, but we've never been the highest price, and our service is included here, and that goes for the wine too. But what you get here when you come, and we don't take for granted how expensive it is, or how much money or how much time and effort it takes to have a meal here. We're very protective of that time, that money, and we really want everyone to experience. I wish we could share it we only have 14 tables, and I wish we could share it with more people, but that's the tricky thing, is the how small it is. We do value everyone.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Well, I think that's a great overview of the French Laundry and what you do. So thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate you coming on.
You got it. Thanks, man. Come see us.
All right. That was our interview with Michael Minnillo from the French Laundry. It was quite the interesting interview. I've always wondered about the mythical place being the French Laundry and all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes there. And I've always heard so much about the hospitality and the focus. And it was really interesting to hear the insider's kind of point of view on how all of that comes together and their focus on the guest and how they make the little things special based on even just little conversations they have at the table. So I hope everybody enjoyed that. I hope everybody keeps it on your bucket list, whether you have been or it's your goal to go there, and definitely go visit the French Laundry and Michael someday. But until next week, we'll be back with another episode. Until then, cheers.
To check out our current offerings and to sign up for the Vint platform, find us at www.vint.co. That's www.vint.co. For questions, comments, or feedback on the Vint podcast, please email us at support@vint.co. Vint and VV Markets are offering securities pursuant to Regulation A. Our offering circular as amended can be found on the SEC website. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments such as those on the Vint platform are speculative and involve substantial risks to consider before investing. We may provide communication that may contain certain forward-looking statements that are subject to various risks and uncertainties. Information provided in any communications, including this podcast, is not legal, business, or tax advice. All prospective investors should consult a legal, tax, or business advisor concerning the subject matter of any communications and any offering.